And so welcome again, everyone, to our weekly call. I'll now share my slides. So they should be about to appear on the on your devices, those of you that have got video. Purpose of the call this week, the primary purpose, as you're hopefully aware, is to just take a look at the agenda for the IETF meeting next week. I was going to be ambitious and also have a quick look at some of the more interesting items on the ICANN agenda this week, but I timed out, if I'm honest, but perhaps at the end, Jeff, you can always chime in if there's anything particularly DNS related that you think is worth highlighting.
Sure.
So a reminder, kicks off, well, technically the meeting proper starts Sunday evening, I guess, for the welcome session, Monday morning properly. So for the meeting itself, Monday the 17th, but with the hackathon on the 15th and 16th and a few other things, which I'll come on to in a second. We're in Bangkok. So for those of you in Europe, the time difference isn't great. For those of you in the US or North America, possibly slightly better in terms of time of day when you need to be about. I looked just before this call, we had 1,127 people registered at that moment in time, as you can see, 719 on site, 408 remote. No doubt that will continue to tick up a little over the next couple of weeks. Particularly remote numbers seems to jump up a bit in the time immediately prior to the meeting.
I mean, one of the things I will say about the time difference, Andrew, is that I have looked at the agenda, and most of the DNS related sessions are at reasonable times in the UK. So they're like 9 o'clock in the morning, so they're not too bad.
Oh, okay. I hadn't looked at it from that point of view.
I won't be there, I'll be here, so that's why I've looked at it.
Yes, you'll be highly motivated to have done that. I can quite understand it. Okay, so, sorry, I just clicked on the wrong thing there. Let me just do that again. With that in hand, in mind then, what I've done, as always, I've just gone through, had a look at the sessions that look especially interesting. I'll tell you why they're interesting in some cases, but not every case, because the working group agendas are not all available yet. In fact, reasonably high percentage aren't of the ones I was interested in, annoyingly, but there you are. And as always, I'm just going to step through these in chronological order. So if there's any other stuff that you think I've missed, feel free to shout out at the appropriate moment. I'm going to go through the main agenda first, and then middle of last week I took a look at the side meetings, so I'll highlight some of those that won't be completely up to date. I will try and update the slides post call to see if there are any other additions worth drawing to your attention. First thing worth a mention is for any new participants, which in IETF terms is very loosely defined as anyone with up to and including 5 meetings worth of participation, although I don't think that's rigorously enforced. So anyone that's interested, on the Sunday there's a new participant program running through the day, so that's a new addition, and you can see on the screen at the moment there's various agenda items. Just a general introduction to the IETF, looking at the standards, processes, talking about the hackathon, talking about internet drafts, etc., etc. So it's basically a one-day induction program for people relatively new to the IETF, which I think is a really good idea. It's being trialled this time out. I'm hopeful that will be a permanent part of the agenda going forward. Also on Sunday is the IPG, which takes place every year on Sunday, or every meeting rather, between 10 and 12 on Sunday morning. More operationally focused than a lot of the rest of the week's IETF content. I think technically it's not an official part of the IETF programme, but is given space each meeting. Always has interesting topics. I do recall, I think it was 2 meetings ago, possibly 3, Jeff gave a presentation which seemed to me to suggest that we ought to be deprecating IPv6, amongst other things. So yeah, definitely worth going along on the Sunday morning just to get your grey cells moving in advance of the week proper. And then Sunday afternoon, you'll see, even if you've not been to the hackathon, between 2 and 4, they have the results presentations. And then back end of the afternoon, 5 p.m. till 7, there's a welcome reception. And also overlapping slightly with that, between 6 and 8, the hot RFC lightning talks, where you get, I think it's 4 minutes, it might be 5, for within reason and pretty much any topic to talk about for that amount of time. There's no Q&A or anything, it's just a chance to sort of highlight stuff that you think may be of interest to the community, perhaps at an early stage, to get people to come and talk to you afterwards. Is often used to highlight side meetings, amongst other things. Other notable thing again this year, or for this meeting, there isn't a host sponsoring the welcome reception, so it is a cash bar. Although as it's in Bangkok, hopefully that means it won't be especially expensive compared to, say, recent meetings in San Francisco or Vancouver, which were slightly more so. Okay, rolling into the meeting proper. And as I say, I'm just going to sort of highlight some things of interest and where agendas exist, suggest why. The DIN-RG, Decentralization of the Internet Research Group, is usually interesting, but they haven't published their agenda yet, so I'm not sure if it will be. Also at the same time slot, session 1 on Monday is Security Dispatch, which has been added back onto the agenda this time round. So you recall for the last 4 meetings, I think it is, we've had the all dispatch experiment, which I thought had been made permanent, but the IESG obviously decided otherwise, and they've reverted back to the old model. So there's a security dispatch, in fact, combined with art dispatch, has been reinstated on the agenda instead. And you'll see it talk about a range of topics, including things like Open Cloud Mesh, organisation trust, etc. So there's a few things there. It doesn't look like especially full time slot, but I'm not sure there's 2 hours worth, but maybe that there is. There's also the then session 2 on Monday. You got the Ops management area working group, but again, when I looked, I couldn't see the agenda for that, so that may be interesting, maybe isn't. Have to wait and see. And again, I'll depending on when the working group agendas become available, if they're available before I circulate the slides, I'll try and update these to add a few additional notes for stuff to give you a bit of more of a pointer which things might stand out. Stepping through, also on Monday, the IAB Open does look particularly worth attending. So they're going to do a summary of the sort of fairly recent network management operations workshop summary. Also some updates from the liaisons to some of the other SDOs, and an open mic discussion. The liaison update, the last meeting was quite interesting, so that should be particularly sort of worth sitting in on. But I think mainly the NEMOPS workshop summary will be worth doing. I should highlight that SPICE, you'll see there on the bottom of session 3 on Monday, has been rescheduled to later in the week, so it isn't taking place session 3 on Monday anymore. And then session 4, you've got the Internet Area Working Group, which amongst other things is talking about safe limited domains. And then post-quantum use in protocols, or same time slot, session 4 on Monday, has got to reflect on post-quantum cryptography in certificates in the hackathon. Also, give some feedback from the side meeting on PQC dialogue with government stakeholders, which I think, and I'll come back to side meetings later, I think that takes place also on Monday, but earlier in the day. And also post-quantum DNSSEC side meeting, which I think might take place later in the week, if I recall. But again, that's on my crib sheet for side meetings that's coming up. So plenty of stuff on post-quantum as well. So let me just pause there for a second and see if anyone thinks I've overlooked anything especially interesting on Monday or has got anything else to add. I can see Jeff, I'm not surprised that post-quantum came up at the ICANN meeting, and Russ Housley made some salient observations of PQC.
Yes, the salient comment was that the current interest in post-quantum was the record now, decode later attack. And so you're looking at applications where the attack occurs years from now. This obviously rules out DNSSEC, where the lifetime of the crypto is basically the lifetime of the query plus a few seconds. And Russ was kind of hosing down the immediate need to think about post-quantum algorithms in DNSSEC. I happen to agree with him on that assessment. I don't think it's the house is burning down right now moment. That doesn't mean that other things like channel encryption, which are susceptible to record now, decode later attacks, shouldn't worry. They should. But the DNSSEC, it really is a case that there's no immediate urgency, was what Russ reported. Thanks.
Thanks. And yeah, that seems to make perfect sense, because you're not relying on it encrypting the content as such. Just tell you that it is the content that it should be. So yeah, that makes sense in terms of capture it now, encrypt later. Vicky's asked a question about the safe limited domains. I haven't had a chance to look that up yet. I only picked that up a short while ago this afternoon. Vicky, has anyone else had a chance to look?
You know if it's even a DNS thing, or is it using domains in a different context?
I think it's a DNS thing, because I think it's also on one of the other DNS sessions. Okay. So it might come up in a second on one of the other slides. It's all a bit of a blur because I had to go through all of the working group agendas. I think there's another reference to it later. But if anyone else knows better or different, please shout out or pop something in the chat if you've got better information on that. Okay, so yeah, we might see that in the chat in a second. Right, so let me move on to Tuesday. Probably the main thing that jumped out at me from the first two sessions, apart from that there weren't that many, well, there were a number of missing working group agendas, unfortunately, but one which was available was the network attestation for secure routing, which you may recall was a topic that came up in Vancouver. And from my recollection of the discussion, it got a sufficiently hard time that the AD who's there, Deb, I think it was, from the security AD, sent them away to the mailing list. And I kind of assumed it was probably going to go away, never to be heard of again. But much to my surprise, it's a BOF again this time. And has got so it's been revisited with a sort of use case and problem statement, bit of a discussion about the proposed charter, etc. The main criticism last time, and this was all about having effectively a nailed down sort of routing from point to point for your traffic, which you could prove cryptographically it had taken that route, gone through those particular routers along the way, over those particular connections, and hadn't deviated. Potentially useful, one of the suggested use cases was for the finance sector. There were murmurs about why would you do this? It just makes the internet brittle. Because it can't automatically reroute in the event of a problem, which is obviously the whole point of using IP. And also it maybe lent itself towards censorship type abuses, amongst other things. So I'm surprised it's come back, but it has. So that will be a really interesting discussion, I think, on the Tuesday morning. But I see Kathleen has got a hand raised if you wanted to jump in.
Just to add that internet exchange points are hearing similar requests about wanting in-country traffic, right? And that's just a different way to provide it, not with the cryptographic assurances that Nazar is speaking of. But I just wanted to mention that this apparently is becoming a more voiced request.
Yeah. So sort of to paraphrase that, sort of a digital sovereignty sort of use case almost, maybe as one option. You could see it in some regimes. They might be particularly attracted to that for other reasons, because it provides a sort of a choke point potentially for other purposes. But well, anyway, no doubt that will be a lively discussion again. I'm genuinely surprised it has come back, but you know, maybe they've got a better sort of described sort of use case, which isn't easily solvable in another route. So yeah, as I say, that would be worth being in the room for if your schedule allows. Other things, well, I've highlighted one of the other sort of research group, the sustainability and the internet proposed research group, but doesn't have an agenda yet, or didn't when I looked. So also on Tuesday, a bunch of other things which caught my eye. The IB Open has got 2 slots. This is the first of the 2, where they're going to sort of touch on WSIS, sort of give a background to WSIS, give other points of view from government and civil society, and propose the role of the IETF. Quite surprised to see WSIS on the agenda for an IETF meeting, because it's very definitely in the policy space, but good to see it as well, I think, in many ways. Intrigued to see how that goes. ADD, that meeting, that's not been cancelled, so there isn't an ADD session this time round, in case you were looking forward to that. That's why that's in red. The TLS meeting, again, it's got 2 slots for this one. They're talking about the status of the FAT, and I can't for the life of me remember what FAT stands for, but it's basically a sort of an expert group that looks at, does initial analysis of sort of proposed sort of protocols, etc. Had some controversy in the discussions in the last sort of few meetings, but maybe it's settled down now. Has been accepted by the more enthusiastic members of the working group. So there's a sort of FAT status on the agenda. Also, of interest to me, they're giving an update on the main encrypted client hello and SCVP ECH papers, which certainly are with the IESG, although there are a few issues highlighted on the TLS chat over the last couple of weeks, but I presume they're going to announce it's cleared the ISG maybe, but by next week. I haven't been following the ISG minutes, so wait and see on that. And then you'll see there's also, again, post-quantum related ID adoption calls, and also we got the Trust Anchor internet drafts, of which there are several. I think one's been adopted so far by the working group, but I know there are a number of other drafts knocking around as well. So Trust Anchors as a topic, I think, will certainly come up. So there's plenty of stuff for the TLS working group, and thank you, Vicky, for helping my memory, a formal analysis triage team. Thank you is what it stands for, in case you're wondering what FAT stood for in this context. And then also, so finally on Thursday, Tuesday even, session 4, the DNS Deleg working group is meeting. Sort of 3 topics I pulled out from the agenda: incrementally deployable, extensible delegation for DNS, extensible delegation for DNS, and working group discussion on drafts. And I think it's the last of those 3 that probably will take a fair amount of time. There were sort of 2 main competing proposals that were discussed in Dublin. Of the 2, one seemed to get more interest in the meeting in Dublin. About 3/4 of the people that expressed an opinion seemed to be leaning towards that one in preference to the other. And there's been virtually no discussion on the Deleg mailing list post meeting, but I think that's going to be revisited here. And I know from discussion at the OART meeting with one of the co-chairs, they're sort of hoping to see conclusion to that, but I've not been following it on the mailing list over the last few weeks. But Jeff, did you want to come in on that one?
Yes, Brian Haberman proposed to the working group 2 options. One was to try and make a decision now between the 2 proposals and work and develop on only one. The other option was to work and develop on both simultaneously and defer a decision much, much further down the track. I'm personally biased. I think decide now is better. And I certainly thought I saw more in favour, and it was only a slight response, of we really need to decide now and just develop one, irrespective of which it probably seems to make more sense. But that was the only development on the mailing list. It appears that that's the track they're going down at the moment. So the long discussion about those drafts is actually trying to figure out if the working group is able to, within the bounds of consensus, figure out which one they wish to develop further. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. And yeah, as I say, I think from the last sort of working group meeting, about 3/4 favoured. Well, to try and differentiate them, if you've been following this at all, Deleg in uppercase versus underscore Deleg in lowercase. But I don't think there's been anything on the mail list to indicate a significant shift in views on that. So if roughly 3/4 of the people with an opinion are leaning towards one, yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with you. Why not make a decision and be done with it rather than just put off the inevitable? But well, I guess that's the whole point of having the discussion.
The IETF has been guilty of confusing everybody by developing multiple solutions in parallel. One only needs to look at the IPv6 transition as the worst possible outcome. It would be, in my view, far better to try and simply go, we're going with one. It removes it with confusion, a bunch of alternatives that all vendors have to develop and presumably at some point try and interoperate with, which is a mess.
Yes.
So yes, sanity says select quickly and move on.
Yeah.
My bias is showing. Thanks.
Well, so I share the same bias and I agree. Anyway, so definitely turn up to that one and join that discussion. It should be interesting, I think. Okay, I'll move on to Wednesday, and with a distinct lack, sadly, of any agendas for the things that I've highlighted. But the things that caught my attention, you got Mimi, more instant messaging interoperability, has got sort of 2 slots again in this meeting, of which that's one, but without an agenda thus far. ModPod, the moderation procedures, has got a slot, although again I think that has moved, but I may have forgotten to highlight that here. So it might take place at a different time now. And that was looking at some of the internal sort of procedures around mailing list moderation, etc. had a good discussion on that topic in Dublin. So this is just continuing that for those of you that want to get involved in some of the the inner workings on the procedural side of the community. Some of you will know Chris Box, one of the main IETF mailing list moderators. I think there's a team of 4, and this hopefully will give a more rational sort of guidelines to them and better structure. Also, you got the MAP research group, measurement and analysis of protocols. All of those are session 1 on Wednesday. None of them have got an agenda, so I can't really sort of bias which one might be of most interest. I also should mention there's a BOF, which isn't really on my list of interesting things to go to, but maybe yours, which is symmetric key establishment and exchange. A bit further down the slide there as well. So there is a BOF taking place also in session 1. And then session 2, the main thing I pulled out was privacy pass, but again, without an agenda. So that's a bit of a guess at this stage. There may be something much more interesting there on the agenda, or indeed in the side meetings, which I'll come on to in a second. And then moving on to Wednesday, session 3, you've got the Privacy Enhancements and Assessments Research Group, PEARG, where the main topic of that is a presentation titled Exploring How to Authenticate Application Messages in MLS, More Efficient Post-Quantum and Anonymous Block Listable. And so it's got all the keywords in there that should, although no mention directly of AI, I suppose they maybe missed a trick, but I've got certainly references to post-quantum, anonymous, etc. So I'm intrigued with the title. There is more detail. I think you can click through to a paper on that as well. So you'll definitely find me there. And then, of course, we have the plenary, as always, late on. Standard agenda for the plenary, so I didn't bother replicating that. So it's a sort of report back from all the different component parts of the hierarchy, if you will, as is standard at all the meetings. So I think that's important to attend, but can't tell you why at this stage. And then carrying on through the week, actually I should pause there again in case anyone's got anything else you want to add to anything I've covered thus far. And if not, I'll carry on. Okay, so on Thursday, you got the IETF open meeting and part 2 of TLS, and I mentioned some things on the TLS agenda earlier. Of course, there's the second of the DNS ops meetings, and probably most interestingly to me, the AI preferences working group, of which there's been a very active discussion on the mailing list about how to express preferences to AI. So I think that's going to be a fascinating working group, but those of you with interest in that topic will no doubt be following the discussion on the mailing list over the last few weeks. It's complicated, I think, is my conclusion so far. And then wrapping up Thursday, you got other things that I'd highlighted. DOLT, the Detecting Unwanted Location Trackers. That's how to stop abusive use of things like air tags to track perhaps someone that or to stalk someone effectively without their knowledge or consent. That seemed to get a bit bogged down last time into the sort of practical considerations of actually how to make this work in reality as opposed to in theory. So I'd be interested if that's moving on. And also latter part of Thursday, you'll see the security area open meeting amongst other things. And then just to wrap up Friday, things I highlighted. I didn't see the tip-top working group. I'll maybe look back at that one in a second. But
Taking IP to other planets.
Oh, okay. Is that, it's been abbreviated to tip-top, has it? That's I missed the acronym. That's very good. Yeah, sorry. So back end of, or sort of on to Friday, rather. Friday morning, you got the scone. That's how a network can indicate to an application maybe bandwidth constraints. The network, the application can decide whether to take any notice of or not. So it's a signaling protocol, basically. It's the second MIMI meeting, and then the rescheduled pod meeting. Sorry, I said that would be moved. I forgot to say when. And then finally, the one I normally go to, which always seems to take place on Friday, the HRPC Human Rights Protocol Considerations Research Group, again without an agenda, so I can't tell you what's on it. And then rounding things off, as always, since Brisbane was the first time, the farewell reception, which usually includes free beer amongst other things, Friday afternoon, just to wrap up the week. Again, I'll pause there before I quickly look at the side meetings in case anyone else had picked up anything interesting that I've not highlighted. No, and if not, as I say, this is a snapshot from a few days back, so apologies if it's slightly out of date. And you'll probably see from this, those of you that looked at side meetings in the past, that the tool being used has changed since Dublin, which makes it much easier to see what's going on, actually, in fairness. So it is an improvement, at least visually. But things that caught my eye, which I'll call out because I don't know how clear this will be on your screens. And Monday, between 3:15 and 4:45, you got the post-quantum cryptography dialogue with government stakeholders side meeting. I think that would be well worth sort of attending if that doesn't conflict with anything else. I think that's basically to see whether whether as a community we can treat organisations other than NIST equally to NIST effectively, and sort of taking on board their sort of recommended PQC. Then on Tuesday, I mentioned this earlier, that you got the post-quantum DNS sec research, but noting a very valid point from Jeff from the ICANN meeting this week that maybe that's less of a burning platform than other aspects of post-quantum. And also, same time, you got the DM Charter side meeting discussion. That's 9:30 to 11 on Tuesday morning. DM was the proposed working group to come up with a digital emblem to for humanitarian purposes, to highlight, say, for the Red Cross, that it was a Red Cross digital property, therefore shouldn't be attacked using sort of cyber warfare techniques, because doing so would constitute a war crime, just as a physical attack on a Red Cross asset in the real world would constitute a war crime. So finding out a way to do that. I had a BOF at the Dublin meeting and also the previous meeting, got a bit bogged down as to whether the community wanted to focus on a single use case first and then maybe broaden later, or try and have a broad charter that could address both a Red Cross type requirement and a whole bunch of other related requirements in one go. The room, from my recollection from Dublin, seemed to be leaning towards go for a narrow use case first and broaden later by changing the charter if that was appropriate. But I guess that would be the point partly of the side meeting on next Tuesday. Then later on Tuesday, I've highlighted enabling data security, trust and privacy for AI in a future network. interesting topic. I can't remember if I've got any direct conflicts whether I go to that or not, but I certainly would do if I could. And then the only things I've highlighted so far, late Thursday, you got high performance wide area networks. This is effectively the CERN type use case, whether there's a way of doing that over the internet rather than over dedicated private circuits, and whether that's a useful thing to do even if you can. And then Friday, you've got the enterprise side meeting, which seemed to struggle the last time I went to that a couple of meetings ago. And I know Torles is trying to gather potential agenda items, so I'm not sure if that's definitely going to go ahead or not. And also EODIA, which is our Education and Outreach Directorate meeting, which traditionally always meets that time slot, 8 till 9 on a Friday morning, which is an absolute pain as it's the end of the week, but there you are. That's when it meets, so I'll probably be there on the Friday. Again, I don't know if anyone picked up anything else of interest from the side meetings. And as before, I will update this after this call with the very latest snapshot of what's scheduled. See, Vicky's put, not sure what war crimes are in cyber warfare if you cannot attribute the crime definitively. That's absolutely fair. Well, it's a war crime, but you won't know who the culprit was, I guess, in that instance. That's for the DM side meeting or charter discussion. So come along.
It's not something I know anything about or have any business commenting on, but I saw one of the better presentations I've ever seen. I think it was at a NANOG. They had some senior military guy come and talk about cyber crimes in the international context of how much aggression is linked at when things cross over into something actionable. Super interesting. I think he was a lawyer actually, and great example of a lawyer coming and giving a talk to a technical audience. But obviously, if you can't be sure who's doing the crime, then it's really hard to have any consequences.
Yes. Yeah, I suppose this is about crime avoidance, I guess, to sort of simplify.
I mean, wagging your finger at somebody, over the internet. I don't know.
Don't do that. I have to say also, your comment about not having any particular knowledge of this area, therefore no business in comment on it. If the IETF community collectively applied that, there'd be very quiet meetings. So maybe that's just my bias, but.
I've always wished that there were certain things that if you did them on the internet, your computer would give you a shock or something. Maybe in a few years' time, these AIs will have evolved to, put up a defense against people who are. Anyway, I better mute myself here.
Yes, the electric shock working group at a future IETF meeting. I'm looking forward to that one. Perfect. Okay. Anyone else with any other comments before we move on? And if not, I will move on to a blank slide. That's a shame. Okay, so just hope that is useful. As I say, I'll update the slides before I share them, and then for those of you that are attending the IETF meeting either in person or remotely, hopefully that will be useful. I should say, if you're attending in person, reminder, we won't have a call this time next week because none of us will be in Thailand, but maybe we'll roughly this time, but local time. So the sort of Monday evening, we'll have a cold beer somewhere instead. As we have tried to do the last few meetings. So we do an in-person chat, but with cold drinks rather than through our computer screens. Anyway, in terms of recent sort of developments, the stuff from the sort of weekly email from earlier today, I won't go through all of these as always, just highlight some interesting ones. First one, as Jeff's on the call, I'd pleasingly, this is top of my list this week. I thought Jeff pulled together a really good summary of some of the more interesting presentations from the recent OARC meeting in Atlanta. So useful aid memoir if you were there, or if you weren't, definitely a helpful summary of some of the stuff that will probably be of interest to you. So you haven't got to necessarily watch recordings, you get a sort of flavour of it from Jeff's summary on his blog post.
Three things. I just want to highlight them because I think they're kind of interesting, each in their own way. I can do this very quickly. The first is, the answer is no. Cloudflare, because they're not a standards body, did a hack around NSEC and NSEC 3 in order to create a more compact version of Node that suited front-end signers. And interestingly, that's being taken up by the IETF. But you sit there and think, but the IETF has control over the standards. And if you're using a front-end signer, you can actually create a new resource record that says, the answer is no, signed by me. And I find it somewhat bizarre that the IETF is actually standardizing a hack that was only introduced because they couldn't standardize a better way of doing it. I think that's odd behavior, quite frankly. We could do better. The second one was Kathy Almond's served stale, which kind of brings into the highlight this whole issue of TTLs and how willing are you prepared to be to let the local cache copy fall out of sync with global state before you say, I haven't got an answer. I'm in two minds about served stale. It gives you an answer when there's no other answer. That's true. But it gives you an answer that you know is out of date. And that's possibly worse than ever. And the third one, which I thought was interesting, is the rise of the HTTPS query, which allows you to specify the application level protocol, which is being used by both Safari and Chrome as a trigger to use Quick. What he didn't mention in his talk, but what I found by looking at it, is that the country that has the highest use of the HTTPS query type is China, that has the lowest use of Quick. I have no idea what's happening in China, but it's curious. So that's the quick highlights that I found. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And certainly this, all good points. Obviously, I thought the serve style in particular I found a really interesting presentation, and I'm going to try and get Kathy to reprise that and have a further discussion on this call in a couple of months' time, if I recall. So depending on whereabouts you are in the world, Jeff, you can always join that and perhaps ask some further questions as to whether that's the right approach or not. But yeah, as I say, it was really helpful to have the summary. So thanks for putting those comments together. Other things I'll highlight, actually, as it is this Wednesday, sort of, again, top of this slide, there's a hybrid hands-on workshop, hands-on DNS workshop at the ICANN meeting, but you can join remotely. It will cover, and I quote, internet routing, secure routing, and techniques that can be implemented to improve the resiliency, security, and best operational practices of network and DNS operations. But despite that, it's designed so anyone with or without previous operational experience can complete the workshop, even if you're not a technician. You do need to register in advance through the ICANN registration, so you have to register for the ICANN 82 meeting to see the details of the workshop and the remote access if you're not there in person. And you do need, well, you need to attend with a device, but if you're attending remotely, of course, you'll have that device anyway. So I thought I would just highlight that in case that piqued the interest of anyone. Just trying to see if there's anything else. Oh, yeah, just on the more on the policy side, Eurodig 25 is taking place in May, and they put out a call for people to volunteer for their organising teams for their various agenda sessions. There are 5 main sessions and 11 workshops, and they have an organising team for each one. So if you're planning to attend Eurodig and can put some time in advance, then I'm sure you'll be much welcomed by the Secretariat to help get the agenda together. And then just a couple of other things to highlight on this slide. Oh, actually three. So you've got the RIPE Labs holding their competition, the regular competition for free access to the RIPE 90 meeting. You have to write an article in order to be part of the competition, and then the winning article will get, I think, both free travel and hotel accommodation and a ticket for the meeting. I think the free travel's from anywhere in Europe, and it's economy travel, so they won't be paying for someone to come from, say, Canberra, for example, which is a shame. But and I think the runners-up prizes, you get the free ticket to the meeting, but you have to pay for your own travel and hotel accommodation. Also, there's a new network operators group. Baltic NOG has just started up for anyone that's based in the Baltic. And then the third one down, the APNIC fellowship program has been announced. So applications are now open for the program. Areas of interest that fellows can focus on include DNS and DNSSEC, which is why I thought it was worth highlighting for anyone based in the APNIC area. And then, as always, there's a whole load of other interesting stuff. One that caught my eye, top of the screen, was the Internet Governance Project published a post, or they're actually sort of setting up a workshop rather. So this post is about, just to sort of tee up the forthcoming workshop on digital sovereignty in the open internet and whether they can coexist. So I thought that was worth highlighting. And then middle of the screen, some debate around Firefox and whether it's completely changed its approach to privacy and whether it will reuse your data or sell your data in any way. So some controversy whether it's fundamentally changed. If that's of interest, have a look at the articles, make your own mind up whether you feel it has or not. And yeah, that's probably it. I think from me, a whole bunch of deadlines coming up, probably ones to highlight in particular. IGF 25, if you want to go to the Internet Governance Forum or put forward any session proposals, you've got till this Wednesday for that. And also you've got till this Friday if you want to apply to be part of Destination Earth Strategic Advisory Board. That's the deadline for a call for experts. Other stuff coming up too, as you can see. And we're quite close to, ICANN is taking place at the moment. We're only a few days off the DNS hackathon in Stockholm. And I've already mentioned, and obviously also pretty close to the start of the IETF meeting this coming weekend. And more stuff throughout the rest of the year, as always. So, as I mentioned before, we don't have a call next week. Following week, tentatively, we'll talk about DNS abuse and transient domains, and the week after that, we'll just do a reflection on some of the highlights from the IETF meeting, with a reminder for that week, the 31st of March. That's just after the daylight saving time has kicked in Europe. So we'll move to 1500 UTC for the 31st of March onwards. So that will put us back onto our normal time slot for those of you in North America. Okay, and that's it from me. I didn't say it at the start, so I should say thank you for DNSR for sponsoring this call. But let me stop sharing there and just see if there's anything from anyone else that you want to raise. And with apologies retrospectively to Jeff that I didn't get around to asking him if there's anything he wanted to highlight from ICANN before he had to drop off to go to one of those meetings. And I can see a comment from Patrick on serve stale. But the pros and cons of that, I'll include that with the call notes, just for reference for everyone. So anything from anyone else that you want to raise before we wrap up? I'm guessing not. So apologies for talking at you a lot this week. Probably entirely bored with the sound of my voice. I know I am. But I hope that was useful for those of you that are joining the IETF meeting, either in person or remotely in a few days' time. So hopefully I'll see many of you there. And as I said, the next Monday, no call, but if you're there in person, let's have a chat over a beer Monday evening local time. Now, I think we'll need one because it's very hot and very, very humid. So we'll be struggling, I'm sure, as we all try and adjust to the local climate. But anyway, thanks for your time. Have a great week, and see you in Bangkok if you're around next week. Thanks all.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Bye.